Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. Dad hides device in daughter's hair. Two teachers are fired the next day. When Tomas Valero's daughter kept coming home from school with tears in her eyes, every day he knew that something wasn't right. He knew he had to get to the bottom of this, however, he'd need to be very sneaky to do so. When Tomas finally did discover what was going on, he couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe what was happening, and it had clearly been going on for a long time. It's never easy for a child to start school. They'll be faced with a lot of new challenges in their lives, from making friends to learning new things. This is why the support of their parents is so important to help them adjust to the new situation. Even with the best of teachers to help them, starting school is a scary and trying time for any child. Many children struggle to adjust to learning new rules, routines, and environments. Dealing with a very strict or unpleasant teacher during this time can make this already trying time infinitely more difficult for a child. When Tomas noticed how much his daughter was clearly struggling with the new adjustment at school, he knew there was more to it. He became determined to get to the bottom of his daughter's dismay. Every parent will tell you that it's normal to worry about your children if they're upset. This is because you want nothing but the best for them. Naturally, Tomas was the same. Something was different, however. When his daughter clearly struggled each day, he became more and more worried. More and more warning bells went off in his head each day when his daughter returned from school, clearly distraught. One of the things he noticed was that his daughter became more and more emotional since starting school. Tomas assumed that this was merely due to the pressures related to starting school. His daughter had to adjust to meeting new people, being in an unfamiliar face, and with performing well. However, as Tomas watched, it got progressively worse, and he knew that he wasn't seeing the whole picture. Tomas's daughter would cry and beg to stay home from school more and more often until this became a daily routine. Tomas watched as his daughter would break down and cry every morning before school. Naturally, this worried Tomas. Something about this seemed highly unusual and suspect. Sure, kids struggle to adjust at first, but this was getting progressively worse. Tomas finally knew that he had to discover the source of her distress. But how? As the days turned into weeks and then months, Tomas watched all excitement and happiness seem to disappear from his daughter. On top of that, she seemed to actively become scared of going to school. Each morning was a battle to get her to go to school. It was clear that she was terrified of going to school for some reason. However, in the end, it became so bad that she didn't want to go to school at all. Tomas repeatedly tried to talk to her to find out what was going on. However, whenever he did, his daughter would clam up and refuse to tell him what was really going on. Tomas wasn't about to give up, though. He knew that he had to find out what was going on. Whatever it was negatively impacting his daughter, and it broke his heart to see her in such distress. But what could he do? Tomas racked his brain trying to find a solution. Tomas's daughter attended kindergarten at Pine Grove Elementary School. Before going to the new school, Tomas had never noticed any problems with his daughter. She'd always seemed quite happy. In fact, his daughter had always been a healthy, happy, friendly, creative child in the past. She made friends easily and didn't have any trouble adjusting. However, the girl before him now was a very different person. Tomas noticed that the change in his daughter only occurred after she started going to her new school. That was the exact moment when she changed from the happy girl he knew to the wreck before him now. What could have caused her to change so much? How did she become such an emotional wreck since going to school? Could the school, other children, or teachers be the reason? To make matters worse, his daughter began to become emotional both before and after her school day. Something was very seriously wrong, and Tomas had had enough. He couldn't bear seeing his daughter so upset, unhappy, and emotionally distraught anymore. While he felt powerless, he knew that he had to do something. Enough was enough. He was going to get to the bottom of this once and for all. We're sure any parent would feel worried about the well-being of their child. It was hard seeing his daughter unhappy every day. He was beginning to get more and more worried about her. The more he tried finding out what was wrong, the more his little girl shrank away. That's when he realized what could really be going on. He thought about it a lot. Then he came to the conclusion that she must be getting bullied by one of her classmates or even one of her teachers. They had a stable and happy family life back at home, so he knew that couldn't be the root of his daughter's unhappiness. But how could he find out the truth? It's very important to be patient. It might even be one of the most important virtues we can all learn, even if it's difficult to practice. When it comes to teaching small kids, this becomes that much more valuable. If you've ever had to deal with kids, then you know how hard they can be to handle. As an educator, patience is part of the job requirement. Even more concerning was that his daughter was still so young. She was in her formative years, meaning that she was going through a crucial and important time in her life. What happens during this time of her life will mold her into the adult she'll be in the future. That's why it was so important that Thomas got to the bottom of it. Thomas and his wife raised their 2 daughters and 1 son with a certain mindset, always making sure to surround them with positivity and encouraging them to be their best selves. They know how important it is to develop a strong sense of self in kids to prepare them for what the future holds. Thomas wasn't going to let all his hard work be for nothing. Keeping Thomas and his wife's family values in mind, it makes sense that a harsh, mean teacher can seriously harm the children she cares for in her classroom. Thomas and his wife definitely didn't want that for their little girl. They started suspecting that they were only just discovering the tip of the iceberg and uncovering a much bigger and ongoing problem. Being a resourceful person, Thomas decided he needed to figure out what was going on with his daughter. He was having a hard time since his daughter was too young and shy to tell him about what was going on with her. It was time for the worried dad to take matters into his own hands. Being the father that he is, he couldn't just let his daughter get sadder and sadder with each passing day. He had had enough and decided he was going to be the one to do something about it. The only question was, how? He thought about it for a while, then he finally came up with the perfect plan. But how could Thomas hear what was happening at school without having to be there at the time? He knew that if he asked to sit in on the class one day, the teacher would just change her behavior. He needed a more creative solution to make sure he was catching her in the act. And so Thomas decided to listen in, literally. He planned and built a tiny hearing device. The next morning, he carefully placed it in his daughter's hair. This would allow him to listen to exactly what was going on at her school. Hopefully, it would allow him to understand what she was experiencing there. He knew that this was a drastic way to go about it, but it was important to him. It was important not only to know what was going on, but to have proof on hand as well. He didn't tell his daughter what he was putting in her hair since he thought it might distract her throughout the day. Thomas couldn't wait to see what would happen over the course of the school day. He waited for his daughter at the door and smiled at her as she ran up the driveway. He was excited to finally get the smile he knows and loves back on her face again. And soon he'd know exactly what had been troubling her. When Thomas started listening to the recording when she came home, he was shell-shocked about what he heard. After listening to the whole thing, he was absolutely livid. He couldn't believe that this had been going on for so long. But even though he was furious, he was still glad that he finally knew what was going on. From the recording, it sounded like the teacher was being very mean to the students in her class. Thomas continued listening to the recording and realized this must be the reason for his daughter's problems. He knew there was no time to waste. It was time for him to do something about it. He had to act fast. He could tell that the teacher was taking advantage of her position and power. It hurt and infuriated Thomas to hear the person they'd paid to care for their daughter behaving so callously. But why? He really couldn't wrap his head around it at first. Why would she do this to her young students? As he was listening, he found out that the teacher not only said offensive things to her students, but her condescending tone was also unnecessarily mean. The recording allowed Thomas to hear just how much she screamed and yelled at the kids in her care over the most trivial things. What should he do now? It sickened Thomas to see that a teacher would behave in such a way, so he decided it was time to raise the issue with the public school district. When things like this happen to your children, it's usually easier to take it up with someone who has the power to do something about it. He knew that approaching the teacher in question would get him nowhere, so instead of taking it to the teacher, Thomas decided that there was a much better chance of changing things if he turned to the state school board instead. So that's what he did. He set up an appointment to tell his and his daughter's side of the story. Despite the fact that Thomas had a valid complaint as well as proof to back it up, the school district did nothing to help him in any way. He couldn't help but feel disappointed by the response he got from them. To him, it was absolutely sickening that the teacher had been tearing down children on a daily basis. Can you imagine just how upsetting it must be to hear they weren't willing to do anything about this problem? They did say they disciplined the teacher for what she did, but that wasn't enough for Thomas. And what would happen when his daughter went back to school? He wanted them to do more than that. Thomas wasn't happy at all about the response he received from the authorities. The teacher was still teaching the class his daughter was in. He couldn't help but feel like it was time for retribution. Soon enough, he made the decision to take it on himself to do something about Mrs. Duncan, the mean kindergarten teacher. The school offered to move his daughter to another class, but this wasn't just about his daughter anymore. Thomas was worried about the safety and well-beings of the other kids in her class as well. As a parent, he knew he had to stand up for his child, but also for all the other children. He was upset the school didn't offer much in the sense of support or change. It was a problem that would greatly affect the lives of all these kids. As long as Mrs. Duncan was teaching, there would be children affected by her anger. Even though he and the other parents protested together, the school didn't budge. However, he and the parents refused to give up. Word got out about what was happening in the school. Everyone heard about how Mrs. Duncan treated the little girls in her class. Thomas didn't get a lot of support after his initial attempts to get justice, but things started turning around when he made a petition on change.org. Soon, parents everywhere were outraged. Soon enough, the public arrived to rally around his house. He had over 2,000 signatures for the dismissal of Mrs. Duncan in no time. It was an even bigger surprise when Thomas found himself in the middle of the media spotlight. Local news channels heard about what was going on at Pine Grove, and they admired Thomas for his determination to get justice. It didn't take long for the story to pop up all across the country. It meant that people all over the nation would hear about what his teacher did to the kids in her class, even if Thomas wasn't able to have her fired. This gave him a small sense of hope that things could still change. By far, the worst thing about what the teacher did to Thomas's daughter is that it was going to have a lasting effect on the child and the other kids in her class. Things that kids pick up when they're so young tend to stay with them for a very long time, if not for the rest of their lives. Had Thomas not noticed his daughter's strange and uncharacteristic behavior and not worked hard to get to the bottom of things, she might have been traumatized for the rest of her life. He was glad he had tried to put a stop to it, but it was a serious thing that also affected the other kids there too. Anyone who has kids knows how challenging it is to be a good mentor by leading by example. A lot of times one will first have to scrutinize and criticize their own actions and behaviors. This isn't easy to get done, but it's essential if you want to be a good role model for your kids. Thomas did learn from his experience that there would be times when things are out of his control, no matter how much he tried being the best parent he could be. Despite this, he'd go through hell and back to ensure the safety of his daughter. He also wanted to keep this from happening to other kids. It's the teacher's responsibility to impart lessons that go further than set the curriculum. They should help improve the imaginations and minds of the kids they teach. These are the things that will leave a massive impact on the lives of the kids as they grow older. A teacher is meant to inspire the kids they teach. It's never a good idea for teachers to display abusive behaviors and assert dominance by fear. All this does is stifle the progress of the kids and make them more anxious and fearful overall. Did Thomas's effort to fix the problem work? We'll have to find out. While Mrs. Duncan continues teaching at the school, we hope she's at least come to the realization of how harsh she's been to the kids in her class. Thomas is still hoping against hope that the necessary changes will happen, since he knows he's in the right. It felt to Thomas like the school had been putting the lives of the kids at stake, all thanks to the short temper of one teacher. He learned it would be impossible to make changes if he didn't take a stand. He desperately hopes his actions change the school system even just a little to make sure other kids wouldn't be harmed. This entire ordeal had been hard on him and his daughter, but eventually Thomas admitted that it made their family that much stronger. He never would have found out that something like this was happening if he didn't go that extra mile. By this point, his daughter is attending a class taught by a different teacher. If anything, Thomas learned how important it is to pay attention to his daughter and how she's acting. This has made him a better dad thanks to what happened, even though he had to face some hard truths along the way. No matter what happens, Thomas will always be there for his daughters and son. He and his wife will stand up for their kids whenever and however they need to. Without great parents who recognize the problem, their daughter would still be getting bullied by her teacher. Since the very day their little daughter left the hospital, her parents have always had her best interest in mind. This is what makes a good parent. Thomas and Lacey always make sure to care for the needs of all three kids they have. In order for kids to grow up and mature into members of society, having parents with a good head on their shoulders and a good heart always helps. A stable home life prepares the child for other things later in life. Aaliyah is truly lucky to have such a great support system. Please share this with your friends and family.